Hey, it's A Humble Collector here. In today's video, we're taking a look at the 4-panel death card of Josef Baumer. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So going from panel 1 here. When I shall one day depart, oh then do not leave me. Be my comfort, my salvation, my light, even in agony. Then moving to the internal card here, panel 2, we have a nice picture of Josef. He left us with a proud heart and hoped to see us again. But our pain is great because this can no longer happen. So sleep well in foreign lands. You will never be forgotten by us. And of interesting note here, on panel 3, the Iron Cross at the top here is dated 1940. Now, Iron Crosses for World War II are dated 1939. So I have a handful of other death cards in my collection that have these 1940 dated like stamp designs on them. I think like 2 or 3 others. But the bulk of Iron Crosses you see on death cards are dated 1939, which is correct. So I don't really know what the story is behind having these 1940 dated Iron Crosses, but it's always interesting to see one pop up. Now moving down here. Died a hero's death for the fatherland, Josef Baumer from Heidhof, Schutze in a Gebirgsjager Regiment, born on February 27th, 1922, killed in action on June 7th, 1942 in the East, RIP. Now, I did actually find a casualty record for Josef. Go ahead and put that up on screen. Josef was a Jaeger in Company 3 of Gebirgsjager Regiment 206, which was part of the 7th Gebirgs Division. And he was killed by a direct artillery hit 2 kilometers east-southeast of Yasny. Now, what's really interesting here, so the 7th Gebirgs Division was stationed up in Finland, but as we've talked about in a few other videos, part of the division got split off and sent down to the area around Lake Ilmen, Demyansk, to help liberate the soldiers that were trapped in the Demyansk pocket, and then also in additional fighting in the region. And they took horrid casualties. I mean, one of the accounts that we did a couple months ago, I mean, we had companies that were reduced down to the strength of a few dozen men. So I've noticed that I've seen a lot of casualty cards for the fighting around Lake Ilmen just because of how vicious it was. And because of that, we actually have in the book here, Schicksalsweg und Kampf der Bergschuh Division, which is about the 7th. We actually have some information about the fighting they were involved in. Now, specifically, we have this map here of fighting the unit was involved in from June 3rd to June 6th of 1942. Now, Josef here, as we discussed earlier, was part of the 206th Gebirgsjager Regiment, which, as we can see, is right here on this battle map, fighting along the Grinov here, up toward Grdino. So I actually have this section translated, and I recorded it previously in another video, so I'm going to cut that in here in a moment so you guys can kind of see what was going on at the time of this fighting. But things only got really serious again when Y-Day, the day of the attack on Grinov, was finally set, namely for June 3rd, 1942. The fighters of the assault group lay tense to their starting positions. The 1st Battalion, Gebirgsjager Regiment 206, which was reinforced by assault guns, was on the left at the seam of Group Shore. The Gebirgsjagers were supported by their comrades from the 1st Battalion, Gebirgs Artillery Regiment 82, whose command post was near the regiment's command post, namely at point 34.3. The VB had once again been given the responsible task of ensuring fire support through their courageous efforts. With such instructions and support, the mountain infantry began the attack. The 1st Battalion, 206th Gebirgsjager Regiment, advanced quickly after the artillery had done valuable preparatory work. In addition, the carefully evaluated reconnaissance results had revealed a weakly occupied spot in the Russian line, through which the Gebirgsjagers skillfully fought their way. The greatest losses in the attack were not due to enemy action, but to the company's own Stukas, which only joined the fighting at this point in the battle. A bomb fell right in the middle of the 1st Company, and a platoon suffered considerable losses. The attack by the 3rd Battalion, 218th Gebirgsjager Regiment, was different from that by the 1st Battalion, 206th Gebirgsjager Regiment. As soon as the attack began, all communications with the artillery and heavy infantry weapons were cut off by enemy action. Total chaos was only prevented by the courageous use of signalers. The Shore Group also had to deal with difficulties of a very different kind. In the southeast corner of the so-called Shorewald, it came across a particularly well-fortified Russian position that had not been recognized by its own reconnaissance. The attack initially came to a halt there as the Russians, encouraged by senior officers and commissars, stubbornly defended themselves. The Jaegers had barely recovered from their shock when their attack threatened to come to a halt again, when an assault gun that had been called in to provide support caught fire from the phosphorus bombardment and was put out of action. This critical situation was ultimately mastered by the dashing efforts of Hauptmann Schor, who directed the fire of a gun from the front line with shouts and flares, and supported by the 3rd Company, which took up base. Only when the darkness of night fell over the battlefield did the fighting subside. Oberjäger Oskar Bonert describes the first day of the attack on the Grinov. At dawn on June 3rd, we, the dispatch battalion, moved into our staging area behind the assault company. We knew the enemy situation from the previous briefing at the sand pit. The high forest with the Russian positions was right in front of us at this point. We dug ourselves into the shot-up young forest and waited for the attack to begin. At around 8 a.m., we heard the dull firing of our heavy artillery from afar. Before the shells reached the enemy bunker line, however, there was a sudden crash and roar around us, and the dispatcher lying next to me was already wounded by shrapnel. Our mountain guns and heavy mortars soon joined the hail of other supporting weapons. When the few Stukas and bombers had dropped their bombs and the heavy anti-tank guns had shot the bunkers to pieces with direct fire, the fire was brought forward by the VBs. The assault guns rolled forward, the fighters and pioneers followed suit. The attack went quickly through the Russian bunker line. The platoons securing the attack wedge followed to the right and left. We messengers trusted ourselves to the protection of the assault guns and followed in their tracks. Through high forest, over forest clearings and clearings, we reached the target before the expected time and were close to the Grinov road. Here, the Soviets had built a second line of bunkers, which they defended fiercely and doggedly. Despite heavy fire from artillery, infantry guns, mortars, and heavy machine guns, the crews did not surrender. Again and again, the bursts of their machine guns and small arms passed over us, so that we had to take full cover. The Jaegers of our pioneer groups attacked the bunkers, taking advantage of the blind spots and finishing them off with hand grenades and concentrated charges. The courage and bravery of these comrades helped the attack to be a success. Although the attack objective had been achieved, the attack was pushed forward until it was just before high forest. There, the enemy again established itself. To complete the overall attack plan, a combat group from the 5th Jaeger Division had to join us from the runway along the Grinov in order to close that ring that was still open to the north side and destroy the encircled enemy units. We did hear the noise of battle from the west, but there was no sign of the combat group. A radio inquiry revealed that the attack had been confirmed. We were in a very threatening situation. The battalion had driven a deep wedge into the enemy position and was now in danger of being surrounded. Our battalion commander then decided to personally contact the combat group. He drove through the Russians with an assault gun along the Grinov road. We silently wished our lieutenant every soldier's luck on this journey, both for him personally and for our battalion. The journey was successful. He was back with us an hour later. The combat group resumed the attack and established contact with us. We had long since dug in and were ready to defend ourselves. We, the messengers, had also reinforced the thin front line to the extent that we were dispensable at the battalion command post. So I was lying with a comrade from the messenger squadron on the edge of a forest meadow. The Russians were barely 100 meters opposite us. The enemy artillery was constantly firing nuisance fire. At around 7 p.m., we suddenly heard the sound of engines from the enemy side, and the first T-34s were already in front of us. The superiority was too great. The front began to falter. It was our Oberleutnant who stood upright and encouraged the fighters to hold on. Several enemy tanks were shot down. Others that managed to break through were killed further back. The night brought various Russian counterattacks, but no breakthroughs were made. It only became critical at the infantry gun position, when the Russians attempted to break through from the pocket. The gun crew, radio operators, and telephone operators repelled the enemy attack. The enemy, according to our Oberjäger Bonert, in his report on the first day of the attack on the Grinov road, had many dead and wounded in the process. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Now, Josef here being in the 3rd Company, I believe that would have put him in the 1st Battalion, which, like you saw on that map, was involved in the fighting around here. Unfortunately, it's a bit unclear. So he died from a direct artillery hit, but it's unclear if he died immediately or if he died from wounds. So it's possible that he was involved in the fighting from June 3rd to June 6th, got wounded at some point, and then passed away on June 7th, shortly after the fighting ended, or if in the aftermath of this fighting, he was killed by an artillery strike, just the next day. But either way, it's pretty interesting. I do have cards for 3 other members of the 7th Gebirgs Division, as well as one reference in the memorial booklet of the Gustav Hoffmann Shoe Company. First off, we have Alphonse Christel, who was a member of Company 10 of Gebirgsjager Regiment 206, was killed by an artillery shot to the head at Redzi, Russia on April 11th, 1942. Michael Petz, who was a Gefreiter in the 12th Company of Gebirgsjager Regiment 206, was killed by an artillery shot to the chest at Yasny, Russia on April 23rd, 1942, which is the same place that it's noted Josef died nearby. Gottfried Weiss, who was an Obergefreiter in the 8th Company of Gebirgsjager Regiment 206, was killed by shrapnel to the head or chest in Bulgorby, Russia on June 3rd, 1942, so just 4 days before Josef here. And then Anton Reiniers, who was a Gefreiter in the 9th Company of Gebirgsjager Regiment 218, and was annihilated by artillery at Kinstingen, Finland on August 10th, 1943. So as you probably noticed, all of the casualties from the division from April through June of 1942 were all from the 206, which was part of this unit that got split off and sent down to this area to assist in the fighting down there. Now, moving further down here, my Jesus, mercy, sweetheart of Mary, be my salvation, sweetheart of Jesus, be my love. Merciful Jesus, grant him eternal rest. And then moving to panel 4 here. You will one day return as a judge. Therefore, we ask you to supply your servants, whom you have redeemed with your precious blood. It's actually a really nice backplate. I don't think I've seen that one before. But yeah, overall, pretty interesting card. The 7th Gebirgs Division has actually become kind of an area of interest of mine, just with, seeing them referenced so many times in the fighting around this region. I've actually specifically picked up cards over the past few months because they reference Lake Ilmen and the fighting around there. So odds are I have quite a few more cards for this unit coming up in the future. So overall, I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment down below. Love hearing from you. Thank you all for watching. Happy collecting, and I'll see you all again very soon.